So let me start with the bigger picture. The regulation of British horse racing has developed over the centuries so that we're now regulated by the British Horse Racing Authority. The Jockey Club, which was the originator of this setup, has become the owner and runner of racecourses and a club. But the important feature of this setup is that it's all operated in private law without any statutory powers underpinning it, and that has a considerable impact on the way it's done. Part of the reason for the change in the regulatory setup stems from the events in 2002 and 2003. A panorama programme basing itself on the former director of security of the Jockey Club alleged that racing was institutionally corrupt and that the Jockey Club was incapable of tackling this. A response was a 6-month review which investigated the allegation and found that was unfounded, but did find that there was evidence of criminal individuals willing to pay corrupt jockeys and trainers to fix races or to pass inside information to the gamblers. And over this same period, we had new methods of betting via the betting exchanges, which became available in the early part of the century, and by 2003 were well established. What you've got in front of you there is a slide showing a Betfair screen with the ordinary standard bet on the left and the lay bet on the right. It was possible for the first time for ordinary punters to bet that events wouldn't happen, that horses wouldn't win or wouldn't be placed. And that was a new threat to the integrity of racing. And let's be clear, I'm not attacking Betfair in any way here. They were operating in a market which was regulated in such a way they could do this. And they've been great supporters of the fight against integrity threats. But that's the fact. The basic methodology, as it turned out in the cases, was simple. 3 steps to it. Find a dishonest jockey or trainer or someone else in the yard, get inside information from them about the horse's prospects, which might be, I'm going to stop that horse from winning if need be, if the price is right, and then use a betting exchange to bet that the horse is not going to win or not be placed. There were variants on this method, but that was the essential of it on all occasions that we've encountered so far. The response was a strong one. The regulator devoted enormous resources to a crackdown, which you can see from these cuttings, got a good response from the press, which was a change. The press used to be pretty hostile to the Jockey Club, but as this crackdown developed, a better press emerged and more support for the regulatory efforts that were undertaken was to be seen. Oddly enough, the first case in this series was against the well-known jockey Graham Bradley, and it had started before the Panorama programme was broadcast. But this was an unusual one in the pattern that emerged. It was based on things that Bradley himself had said, giving evidence to a Crown Court and in his autobiography, and on the word of a City of London tailor, Chris Coleman, who gave evidence that he was accustomed to buying information from jockeys at his city premises in return for suits. Bradley was found in breach, the finding was upheld on appeal, and court challenges to the penalty of 5 years disqualification failed. But the pattern that emerged after that was a very different one. Over the following 4 or 5 years, 40 individuals were targeted for prosecution, as we would call it, 13 jockeys, 2 trainers, and 25 others, over a series of conspiracies that were uncovered through the use of investigative methods and intelligence, particularly stemming from the betting exchanges. And here's a summary of the way that these cases have been presented and the key factors in them. Rules, first of all, need to be clear. They need to be practical. They need to be understood by those that are affected and easy to apply. And they need to have support from within the racing industry. The trainers and jockeys and others, owners included, who are subject to the rules need to understand them and support the approach of the regulator in ensuring integrity through banning the misuse of inside information, even if it's supplied without reward. Leads for these investigations and prosecutions come from a variety of sources. The key to all of it is the intelligence unit operated within the BHA. Sometimes we get information from confidential sources, sometimes from other sources, including BHA staff. But most often in these cases, the source has been the betting exchanges themselves. Betting organisations have provided information voluntarily under memoranda of agreement, and Betfair was the first to enter into one of those, and under licence condition 15, which I'll be explaining in a moment. It's a regulatory mechanism for ensuring information is passed. Licensed participants subject to the rules can be obliged to provide information, and non-licensed persons we were able to establish could be forced to give up information, or at least their phone providers could, via court orders under a procedure that goes by the odd name of Norwich Pharmacal. The betting organisations have been supportive, but most of all Betfair, providing full account histories, IP addresses and cookie IDs, which will tell you how the computers are being used and who's using them and where, and call recordings, and we'll hear one of those in a moment. But other betting organisations have been supportive, and an example from Ladbrokes will be coming up shortly. The licensed participants under our rules have a duty to assist, and they comply with it by giving interviews, although not always by telling the truth. They're questioned in a way that is common to police organisations, with warnings in advance, a sort of caution. The interviews are recorded and transcribed and put in evidence at the eventual hearing. The third-party disclosure process which we've developed has been absolutely key to the success of prosecutions. This odd case from 1974 established for practical purposes that the BHA could get a court order against a phone provider of a third party who's not subject to the rules to obtain details of their phone use and thereby fill in gaps in the evidence gathering that's been undertaken using the methods available against licensed people. All these categories of information are available from phone providers, and increasingly they've been resorted to fill in the full picture from which inferences can be drawn when it comes to a hearing. Cell site analysis tells you roughly where a person was making a phone call from, and that can be very important. Were they on the course? Were they at home? Were they in a betting shop? Analysis of the data that's been obtained is absolutely crucial. And this is done by in-house personnel from the BHA. There are in-house betting analysts who are specialised and have come invariably from a betting background, from betting organisations. And then they've got in-house analysts who will take the raw data about phone calls and associations and turn it into the most extraordinary charts, one of which is up before you now. This is a sample. It's pretty difficult to read from where you are, but right at the top in the middle there's an individual. And the lines of this web of intrigue join up the individuals and computers, and the network tells you who's in touch with whom, how often, and by what means. That's just part of the picture. The most effective tool is this graphic timeline, which demonstrates communications between individuals and Betfair in this instance. This is an example taken from a case I'm going to show you in a moment. At the top, the black line going across the page, you've got the jockey. The next line down is, as it happens, Chris Coleman, the city tailor, the punter, and the vertical line connecting the two on the far left is a phone call from the jockey to the punter. The next red line down is a computer at a company called Benfield, and the red line that goes from that to the bottom of the page shows lay betting from that computer. We'll come back to this timeline shortly. So this is the first case study, the Gary Carter case in 2005. The case against Carter was so strong that he decided to move to Spain before the hearing took place and didn't defend it. Part of the problem was that involved was Mr. Coleman, the city tailor, and we knew already that he was corrupt because he told a Crown Court that. We also got information from Norwich Pharmacal which demonstrated the full extent of the conspiracy in which Carter was involved. There's that timeline again, and the puzzle was what's going on between the green line, Chris Coleman, and the red line, which is the computer at Benfield that's laying the horse that Carter is going to ride to lose. Norwich Pharmacal found out. We had a phone number. We found out who the phone number belonged to, and it was possible then to fill in the gaps. There's the gap. We want to know what's the link between Coleman and the betting. That's the timeline as it developed after the third-party disclosure. And you'll see towards the top of the page, a very busy picture of phone calls going backwards and forwards between Chris Coleman and someone else. That someone else turned out to be named Dean Coleman. He was Chris Coleman's son, and he was sitting at his work computer doing the laying activity. And as you can see, the green line down to the red Dean Coleman shows that immediately after the jockey called Chris Coleman was on the phone to his son, and immediately after that, Dean Coleman was online to Betfair laying the horse. Pretty persuasive evidence which led to Coleman skipping the jurisdiction. Next up, we had a Red Lancer, which was a one-race case, the 9th in the series following the 8 that Carter had been involved in. There's the picture of the lay betting on Red Lancer before the race, fairly substantial liabilities undertaken. They all came good. The profits were made because in a fairly standard operation, the jockey was persuaded to have some problems getting out of the stalls, started the race last of all, and finished it in pretty much the same position. We moved on to get rather more ambitious, and the conspiracy case we called User 7 involved 4 jockeys and a conspiracy at the centre of which was an ex-bookmaker called Ian Nicol, who was using front accounts belonging to other people but operated by him to undertake liabilities up to £1 million over the 4 jockeys' rides over a period of time. This was a tricky one to prosecute because there were 37 races and 4 jockeys, but the success rate of the lay bets was quite extraordinary. The 2 failed, I think, because the jockeys got nervous about fulfilling their undertaking because they thought it would be so obvious. But we established before the panel that 5 of those races involved non-trying by the jockeys. The bet profit was reduced because of the 2 unsuccessful lay bets. After all of that, an ex-police officer called Dame Elizabeth Neville was called in to undertake a review of how this was all going. And you'll see that the BHA's efforts got 4 stars, if not 5, and were held, at least at that time, to be a model for the effective investigation of corruption in sport. And I believe that that's still the case, although we have constant challenges and things change all the time, and we must update the methodologies. Following the Neville review, there was another case in the courts in which the methods used by the BHA were challenged. That was Dean McEwen, following the earlier Bradley challenge, and we got judicial approval of the methods that were adopted. So this is a court-approved approach. What, you may ask, though, of the state authorities? They've played no role in any of this except for the court orders. We have a gambling commission. It's been in place for nearly 10 years now. It has these licensing objectives which involve trying to prevent sport from gambling from being used as a source of crime or being used to support crime, and ensuring gambling is conducted in a fair and open way. And the Gambling Commission established this license condition so that all betting organisations which it licenses have this obligation to provide sports governing bodies with evidence of the suspicions that they entertain if they do. And they do this. The Commission also has power to provide information which it gathers itself under its own investigative powers to sports governing bodies for them to use, and that's also happened. And finally, the Commission has power to prosecute under this offence, but it's never done that. Effectively, the Gambling Commission has been a supporter of the regulatory efforts rather than an initiator of its own actions against integrity problems. The Minister for Sport was terribly proud of Section 42 of the Gambling Act and thought, according to this statement, that it was going to be very effective. But criminal prosecution in our jurisdiction has not been a success. Shortly after the Minister said those things, this case came before the Old Bailey. It generated enormous headlines because of the fame of Kieran Fallon, ex-champion jockey, who was one of the main defendants. For 40 days, the prosecution presented its case, and on the 40th day, the judge withdrew the case from the jury on the basis there was no case to answer. A disastrous collapse for the only criminal prosecution in horse racing that we've encountered so far. The Neville review said, that the BHA should keep things to its own regulated community and only refer things onwards if it was incapable of dealing with them. And that is effectively what's happened. The widespread view recorded by the Neville Review, which remains the case, is that the criminal justice system isn't up to scratch for this purpose. Proof of the pudding was when the BHA pursued 4 of the defendants in the criminal trial in disciplinary proceedings based essentially on the same evidence or some of the same evidence, and they all admitted breaches of the rules, including in one case deliberately stopping a horse from winning. The Neville Review, understandably, wasn't complacent about the way that things were being run and recognised the need for continual evolution and development, and that's certainly recognised within the BHA. I'm just going to go through briefly 3 subsequent cases in which the BHA has demonstrated the effectiveness of its regulation, and just highlight a few features of the evidential landscape in those cases. It's a Man's World was a conspiracy on a pretty large scale, including 5 jockeys and 4 principal bettors over 10 races. The feature of this was particularly interesting was that Ladbrokes provided call recordings which demonstrated one of the conspirators, Mr. Sines, trying to force the price down by pretending to want to back It's a Man's World, the horse at the centre of it, on a large scale, before he laid the horse on a large scale himself nearer the time.
Ladbrokes, Wayne speaking.
Wayne, I was speaking to Rick, you're saying?
Yeah,
I want to have a large bet at 245 on It's a Man's World. I want the price.
245. Yeah, I think 11:30 for that race.
Can't get me a price on the large bet now?
If it's your own horse, we possibly might be able to get you a price.
Yeah, can you give me a price on horse and do it on a 30, 40 grand?
We wouldn't be able to get a price to 11:30. That's anything.
No?
No, definitely not.
All right, well, can you see if you can take the 40 grand and come back with me a price, ring me back at 11:30?
So what's the bet request?
It's a Man's World
Yeah.
in 245.
How much?
40 grand.
Right, 1 second.
So he's got up to 40 grand at that stage. They call him back.
Hello?
Mr. Sines?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Ricky giving you a call back from Elite.
All right, Ricky?
We've got a pricing for the 245 race now. Was it to Man's World after, yeah?
Yeah.
That's 3 to 1.
3 to 1. How much can I have?
I couldn't comment on that. I mean, what's the bet request?
40, 50 grand?
Do you have to 40 or 50?
Yeah, whatever one, no problem.
So 50,000 you want, or 40,000? It has to be a request, so I can.
Here's the transcript we used in the hearing, and you'll see Mr. Sines, having been uncertain whether he wanted 30 or 40 or 50, was offered 10, and it wasn't enough for him. He wanted 50 or nothing at all. And another call was made to another bookmaker later on along similar lines, although even larger sums, and it did have the effect of driving the price down and making the lay betting more appealing. The Heffernan case was the longest ever ban in British racing's history. Heffernan was the jockey. He was dealing with a soccer star called Chopra, who was suspended for 10 years. The important and interesting feature of this case is that whilst we'd seen a lot of telephone communications and they'd been absolutely key to prosecuting previous cases, on this occasion the communications were made via gaming consoles over the internet. And had it not been for the girlfriend of one of the participants giving evidence of all of that, it's doubtful that that would have come to light. The second feature that's of interest is that there was evidence from the Gambling Commission which supported this successful regulatory prosecution. Since this is a front-running topic, or the title of this talk is front-running, I thought it'd be interesting just to look at Eddie Ahern, which is the most recent of my case studies. Ahern was found to have deliberately ensured that his ride judge at the moment failed to win a race, 1 out of 4 that he was prosecuted over. And this is the first time in Britain that sectional timing figures were used. They're not sectional timing figures of the sophisticated kind that you're used to. They were done after the event. But they demonstrated that what we're about to see was somewhat exceptional. And they contributed significantly to the panel's finding that Ahern had deliberately ensured that this horse didn't achieve its best placing. I'm going to show you 5 short clips.
And they're off, racing away 2 miles in front of them in the Felbridge Handicap. And first one to bounce away, Judge the Moment, who's in the blinkers for the first time. And a real positive ride as well, kicking on to about a 5-length advantage early. Gone blazing off here as
Yes, blazing off, and just imagine what happens.
An unusual sight here as Judge the Moment and Eddie Ahern tow them along to a decent advantage. Still must be about 8 lengths clear now, I'd say, from is the back marker. Racing towards the final mile of the journey shortly then, just slowed things up in front now, Judge the Moment. He's only in front now by 2 to 3 lengths, allowing Mashdu to close the gap right in, about 8 lengths away.
Well, it's going according to plan, it seems. The gap is closing, and guess what?
The field now begins to cluster up. They were well strung out early, but only now 4 or 5 lengths will cover the whole lot of them. Judge the Moment has now been headed, and now going on Mashdood under Luke Morris as they race towards the final 3 furlongs. Mashdood picks it up. Judge the Moment weakens quickly. Rare coincidence on the inside, and then Gandalf is now taking that 2nd place. They're heading inside the final furlong, and Mashdood by 2.5 lengths now to Gandalf in 2nd, and then Rare Coincidence, and racing up towards the line. It's Mashdood for the Peter Hyatt stable and Luke Morris on board. Mashdood has won the staying handicap.
And Judge the Moment has come in a very distant last. Some issues arising from this, which it may be worth discussing later on. The rules, I mentioned them earlier. One of the problems that we've got at the moment in the BHA is that we've had a finding from the appeal board that says conduct is not corrupt within the rules if it involves the passing of inside information about a horse's prospects without reward and without any action taken to stop the horse from achieving its best possible placing. In other words, a tip passed on, even negative information, that leads to lay betting is not corrupt. There may be some rule changes flowing from that. Communications evidence, I highlighted earlier the use of the internet through games consoles. There are other means that are going to have to be grappled with which don't leave the sort of traces that phones do, including WhatsApp and other methods that people are apt to use to get round what is known to be the vulnerability of phone communications to the production of evidence. And then there are inferences. Our experience has been that a panel can be persuaded to draw adverse inferences against people, provided there's very detailed evidence showing exactly what was going on between the individuals, not what they were saying necessarily, but when they were saying whatever it was, how long they were saying it for, and the context in which it was being done. Of course, Britain is only part of a much bigger picture. There is a fight against integrity threats worldwide, and it includes this region. This is a clipping that I took from the papers when I was here in January. It refers to football, but the threat to horse racing is nonetheless there. It seems to me that these are the things that we've got to try and achieve over the coming years. Harmonisation of the approach and the rules that apply, collaboration between different regulatory bodies, and a global approach which recognises that the threat is a global one and a global response is vital. Thank you very much.